Hi there. Good evening. This is part two of the videos that I've been working on the issue of divorce. Um, and I apologize for ending it shorter, but I guess that's kind of how I'm going to do this in probably 20-minute blocks to deal with certain topics here and there. So there's going to be a few of these. So where I left last time was we we established why government acknowledges marriage to begin with. And it's centered around the issue that they can monetize the exchange of goods and services between two willing parties who combine households. And they are more than willing to do that because it generates revenue for the government in one form or another through taxes, through fees. Um, and so when you remember that the courts exist to generate revenue, think of it this way. If people didn't need to share goods and services, the government doesn't make money, doesn't have a source of revenue. Let's look at the courts themselves. Why do the courts exist? The courts exist to handle and settle disputes parties cannot resolve between themselves. And so from local government to federal government, you see in our courts now in this day and age, courts are being used for everything. You don't like somebody, take them to court. You don't do this, sue. It's always a matter of going to the courts as a tool of aggression and adversarial conquest of a potential um, oppositional force. So think about it. If governments and courts exist to generate revenue, if people can settle their disputes between one another, there's no need for courts. If people, for lack of a better term, don't divorce, then there's no and or they settle their differences outside of a court and decide to, you know, amicably break up, the courts don't make money. That fuel source is starved. If people who are in divorce or have children decide to handle their custody issues between each other like mature adults with people who are understanding about negotiation and agreements, if they handle it outside the courts lose out on money. So what vested interest does an organizational body have in promoting any services that cut off the fiscal supply chain or the fiscal revenue stream that they're getting? So if the courts exist to keep themselves open and as a revenue stream, any decisions made in the courts inherently, logically, are going to be done to assure that the courts are still going to be utilized and needed in the process. That is why a lot of times you see judgments handed down that you're standing on the outside going, how could a court come up with such a stupid, decision on this topic or that topic? How could OJ get free? Okay. I'm sorry to invoke the OJ thing, but that's a great milestone there. It all comes down to the issue of justice and the misunderstanding of what justice is in our society. There's this naive belief amongst citizens that the courts offer justice. And what that means is the resolution of an issue where the end result is based on a higher truth that is a universal truth that gets out into the open and is exposed. So, justice means if somebody has killed someone in cold blood, that all the evidence comes out and it is proven by beyond a shadow of a doubt with all the evidence given that this person indeed committed the crime, and they are sentenced, convicted, and sentenced for that crime, then justice has been served. That's not what justice is anymore. It's the ideal. Justice now has nothing to do with the outcome of a decision in the courts. Justice is centered on process, the process by which the decision is delivered. If the courts can say and show that they followed a written procedure that has been outlined in paper and verified, they can justify that they followed that procedure in the process of giving a judgment, then whatever the judgment is, justice has been served. Because justice has now been aligned with due process. But even due process is vague because it's opened up to interpretation about application. So the idea of justice, going to the courts for justice, anybody who goes to the courts wanting justice, meaning they want the truth to come out and it to go into their favor and they're not lying and they know the truth, they're going in naively. They're going in not understanding the arena that they're going into. The courts are adversarial in nature. I want you to think it like the Roman era with the Colosseum. The courts are the equivalent of the Roman Colosseum. You've got the king and all of his cohorts, the court, sitting up there watching what's happening in the arena. The, the judge will sit there with the finger up or finger down. The people in the arena are observers who've paid money to be there because they get a show. They've also got their own side bets going based on the action that happens in the arena. Caesar, the king, the judge, and all the courts, they don't care because they're getting paid whatever. They just want to keep the action going and they want the excitement. So they will vote for whatever keeps the action going, the excitement going, and keeps the games going. They don't care who dies in the process because as soon as you know the players are killed, there's other people waiting in the wings. So just move on in to keep the cycle. As long as you keep the doors open and you keep cycling through, there's fresh body, fresh meat. Okay. So when you understand that that's how the courts function, you'll understand that revenue is to be made on families, monetization. That's why it's very easy in our society to get married. Anybody can go down right now and sign a contract for marriage and all the fiscal entitlements that go with it. But it's very hard to get divorced. It's very hard to get divorced, and it takes a lot of paperwork. Why? Because the more paperwork and the more confusing and the more animosity, the more money you can generate by belaboring it. The more you can get the two parties fighting each other and nickel and diming, that means more money is going to change hands, more lawyers are going to get paid, the longer the court will stay in the system. That's why one of the very first things they ask you when you go for a divorce is your financial statements. They want to see your disclosures. First things first, change up the business. You got to because you got to monetize that. You got to get that property changing hands. And they want people acting emotionally because when you act emotionally, you can be easily triggered one way or another. And if you go in thinking justice is going to be served and you're going to your your name's going to be cleared, no, no, no. It's about basically keeping the ball in motion. That is why most family law decisions are horrendous. Now, here's another thing. There is no mechanism in family law to truthfully adjudicate families. Why? Because every family is different. Every family has a structure that's different. It's all subjective. One family over another family. No two families act alike. No two families raise children alike. So, how do you streamline and apply justice equally to protect all members of a family when you've got all this differentiation? Well, the courts found a way creatively around that. It's called judicial discretion. Judicial discretion is written into the family code, basically, and written into law that allows a judge to interpret for themselves on a case by case basis how to apply the law specific to that situation. It allows you to tailor the law and it gives you a lot of authority, but it's also heavily influenced by personal bias. So if you have a family that raises their kids different from you, one parent doesn't like it, the other parent does, that you're looking at their case. If you disagree with how that parent raises their kids because you don't like their lifestyle, your bias is now influencing, and that's a miscarriage of justice because you've not become an impartial person. You've now let your personal bias impact your decision making. And then judges hide behind that and say, well, I have judicial discretion. But in doing so, the worse a judgment can be made in a family law case, the higher the possibility of an appeal by one of the parties that go then and file with the courts, further keeping the case in the courts and the revenue stream coming in. That's why with child support issues, here's a great example of child support. The child custody disomaster, this complex mathematic equation, is broken down into percentages of how they compute who pays what. The biggest weighted percentage in the disomaster is custodial time, with the belief that it's called the um, presumption of truth that whoever has the kids most pays more of their bills. Therefore, the other parent should pay and compensate, regardless of how much they make, because it's based on a custodial time issue. The problem with that is this: it behooves lawyers to inherently separate. Oh, and the higher the custody time, the more the other person pays. It behooves the lawyers to separate one of the parents from the child's life completely or as much as possible, then foot them with a bill for a child they never see, payable to the other parent. And then the money that's paid goes into an account that the state holds that earns interest, and at a certain point that money is released to the other party, but just so long as it can earn interest for the state. So children have been monetized, and it's a form of human trafficking through the courts. It's a form of monetization of children and families, and with threats of, if you can't pay, for a debtor's prison of sort. So the courts have no vested interest in correcting this because it generates billions of dollars a year in revenue for family courts. And they want people fighting in their arena under the misbelief that they're going to get justice, when the true fact of it is both parents and the children are being raped and being monetized by the government, who supposedly has their best interest in mind, but has nobody's interest. Remember, two parties, both represented by lawyers. But then there's a third party. It's a judge who was a former lawyer. There are three parties involved in every family law court case: the mother, the father, the plaintiff, the respondent, and the judge. The judge represents an interested party. The judge represents the state and their jurisdiction. They will always give a judgment. When I say always, the majority of the time, they will, majority of the time, give a judgment that assures in one way or another that the case stays within the court system as long as possible, or until the child is of age and ages out of the court system. So they want you to get married as soon as possible and get divorced as soon as possible, because that means potentially 18 and a half years of revenue to them by having jurisdiction over your case. And they don't mind because it feeds the beast. And the goal of this whole thing is to control families, to remove the individual ability. Because remember, let's look at this. Remember, children of divorce, fatherless homes, higher crime rates, higher divorce rates, higher drug rates, higher teen pregnancy rates, higher, negative impact on society. Every one of those things that are negative impacts ends up in the courts, with the courts having jurisdiction to handle it. They want screwed up members of society, because with screwed up members, it equals job security. They want fathers fighting mothers. They want fathers fighting for their rights and want mothers fighting for their rights, and then fighting each other for a table scrap of some justice they think the courts will give them. The courts don't care. The courts do not care about you, your ex-wife, your ex-husband, or your children. The courts care about their own power and monetizing you to keep it going. And as long as you choose to ignore that and you choose to see your ex as the enemy, you are feeding the problem. And if you don't care, then that's on you. That's your conscience. You're going to have to live with yourself on that. because it means you really don't care about your kids. It means you really don't care about other people. You just care about yourself. And if that's the person you are, then what kind of contribution are you making to society? And if you don't care, then why are you alive? This goes back to one of my very first statements about why we exist in the world. We exist for a relationship. And if your sole purpose is to live selfishly and take what you can get, here's some interesting facts for you. I had a discussion with a guy today talking about how men are so wronged in divorce. And I said, it's only about money. I said the reason men are so wronged in divorce right now is because they're inherently the major breadwinners in our society because of the pay disparity gap. If the roles were flipped, if women were the predominant breadwinners in society, you'd see more men getting uh, custody than women. Why? Because child support is tied to custodial time and earning potential. It's the game. And it just so happens in our society, since men are the major breadwinners, that the laws are made that way. Now, case in point, I believe it was Governor Rick Scott, Florida uh, Republican. There was a bill that came out recently to attempt to give parents start out the gate equal custody to level the playing field to say, hey, both parents are healthy and good, basically following the statistics that both children need both lives, need both parents in their lives during a divorce and whatnot. A Republican, and I'm conservative, all right? I used to say I'm Republican conservative, but I'm not. I'm basically an independent conservative, fiscal conservative, social moderate anymore. If there was a Democrat out there who would fit that bill, I'd probably vote for them. That's why I always said when it comes to who do I like, I'm a Truman era Democrat. If you know who Truman was, you'll understand. But anyway, this bill would have given parents equal say. In the explanation by the governor who shot it down, said it should be that is dangerous. I'm paraphrasing here because parents could be self-serving in their desires for their kids. And this is about the best interest of the kids. And that decision should be left with judges. Let that sink in. That decision about how to raise your kids should be best left with judges. Don't tell me for 1 second the government cares about your family. Don't tell me for 1 second either side of the party cares about your family. They don't. It's about moving society from one column to another column. Independence, self-sufficiency to government dependence. Independence, self-sufficiency to full government dependence. It's called social reconstruction. It really started to gain weight in the 60s. Now, I talked about this a while ago. The tender years doctrine was this bogus doctrine that started in the 1880s that children of a tender years automatically should go with their mother because they're around them all the time. There's no psychological basis for this. It was all assumption. It automatically negated a father to being a lesser figure in the child's life. No psychological. It was some bogus, psychological studies that has since been proven wrong. But for the longest time, that has been the permeating attitude of family law. Since the 60s and whatnot, they started to change and they put it in the law books that now they're moving towards 50-50 equality. But the asterisk of having judicial discretion allow you to interpret, you don't have to adhere to that with the law. So you can make it up as you go. And you've got full right to because the law grants you that authority to deviate any way you want. So, since the 1960s, equal parenting, equal rights to parenting has been on the books, and the tender years doctrine was basically written out. Right now in society, still mothers, and this can all it's the 2018 U.S. Census. The uh, mothers still get in 80% of divorce cases, 80 plus percent, I think it's like 82% get custody, majority custody. And 82% of the divorces in the United States, mothers get 80 get majority custody. In 90% of child support cases, fathers pay child support. So for 60 years, the tender years doctrine has not been on the books. Yet this is where we're at still. Why? Because judicial discretion is what it is. If you were to promote equal parenting, do you know how much revenue goes away? How much revenue goes away when you equitize custodial time to the state? Where you have parents agree, basically, you have parents agree to fund the children while they're in their stead. Because family law is built on a lot of presumptions. Presumption of correctness, which is based on what is it? It's based on subjective moral perspective on what should be right or what should be the case. You can't quantify it. So what the courts do to the best of their ability in certain times is turn familial transactions into business contracts. There was a situation with a judge. One judge in a case understood that the parties involved had a business contract between them. And that judge said outright, well, one party had a reasonable expectation that the other party would follow this contract because they both signed the contract. Now the other party doesn't want to. So the other party has a reasonable expectation that the other person is breaking the terms of the contract. You can't get mad at them for that because they both signed this contract. Later on, a different judge in the same courtroom said, a marriage contract is a business contract? It is. That's weird. It's an unintelligent judge, unknowledgeable. They have a position of authority, they have a position of power, but they don't have an understanding of logic. They don't have an understanding of business. They don't have a standing of following through with your contracts. And that you're seeing that all throughout the United States. This actually goes back to, and I hate to say this, so I'm going to throw Republicans and Democrats under the bus here. As much as I liked Reagan, Reagan screwed up royally. 1969, Governor of California signed into law the Family Law Act of 1969, which basically opened up the door to no-fault divorce. Once he did that, divorces skyrocketed in the United States, and the divorce industry was born. Lawyers making money hand over fist. And 80% of the women, 80% of the divorces were filed to this day still by women because women stand to make bank out of the process. So they're encouraged not to honor their vows. You can't logically say that all those divorces, in 82% of the cases, all those men are abusers. All those men are evil people. There's a whole thing about honoring your commitments. What do you say on your wedding vows? Love, honor, and cherish through sickness and in health, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, till death. Are you going to tell me that every one of those marriages in 82% of all the marriages in the United States, from a Christian standpoint, says only divorce, says only the justifiable is an affair. Having an affair on the other partner is grounds for divorce. You're going to tell me that there's all those are affairs? Maybe we've lost the idea of commitment. Maybe we've lost the idea of long suffering for men and women, because men bail too. I'm not saying this is just about women. But I'm saying 82% of the divorces are filed by women. So women are leaving men. Men aren't leaving women. Women are the ones filing. So they're the ones signing on the dotted line to leave the marriage vows. So where's the breakdown in understanding what a commitment is? Well, people say, well, should I just accept that I'm being abused? Should I accept that this person is doing this to me? Should I accept that my life is potentially threatened? I said, no. But if the goal is to protect your children, to protect marriage, or maybe the goal isn't to protect marriage, but if the goal is to keep your child and help them become a healthy, productive member of society, part of that is coming about honoring commitments. Also comes about the issue of looking at the bigger scope. Our actions here have impact way beyond the years that we can think about. What about the idea of separation for a long time? Separation, that's awesome. Two people parting ways so that they can get their heads together, clear up, look at things with a new perspective. That's fine. And then come together, maybe through therapy to try to solve problems. But we have this thing. They're irreconcilable differences is now what family law uses. There's no such thing as irreconcilable differences. Irreconcilable differences only occur when one of the parties refuses to budge from their position. That's a choice. I just got a certification in conflict resolution and mediation. And the idea is to help two parties in disagreement come to an agreement on in a mutual way that everyone benefits, so that you don't have to go to court. It's to teach healthy collaborative. The courts don't want healthy uh, collaborative problem solving. They want contention. They want that because it generates revenue. If you have two parties that solve their problems outside of a court, the courts lose. I mean, again, I got this certification earlier this year to teach people how to deal with their problems. And you can't. Some people are so committed to their point of view. In that case, it is a lost cause. You having somebody that really has no desire to be agreeable, no desire to admit fault, no desire to move from their position. A person like that can't be reached. And I pray for you I pray for you when you're connected to that type of person, you're in for a life of hell. That person is a taker. That person is somebody that has no understanding of relational connectedness and conflict resolution, negotiation. And whenever your time is done, that you're no longer a part of their life, you'll be much healthier because you will hopefully put yourself in people who are like that, and they're still gonna be living with themselves. So whatever happens there, you know, just pray for them and say, "There for the but for the grace of God go I." So all that to be said, when it comes to the issue of divorce, the courts don't have your best interest in mind. You might think they do, but they don't. They don't have your kid's best interest in mind. They have their own best interest in mind. And it's about keeping control of you and breaking down the family because they know that if the family's broken down and those kids go into society and become screwed up members of society, they're going to have divorces, they're going to do drugs, they're going to have teen pregnancy, they're going to break laws, they're going to do all these negative things, and they'll end up just in a different division of the same court system and keep the funds going. So then becomes this question. So now that we know all this, what do we do with all this? What do we do with all that information? If you understand that the courts exist for their own benefit and monetization, and that's they want the revolving door of fresh meat going in and getting spit out, grist for the mill. What do? You starve the courts. You starve the courts of the very thing they want, fresh bodies and ignorance. They want now there are here's a great example. You always hear best interest of the child, best interest of the child. They make divorce so easy except in very rare cases, divorce is never in the best interest of a child. So if somebody is getting a divorce, they're already not thinking about the children. So the courts logically can't say we're acting in the best interest of the children because if they don't have anything in place to prevent you from having a divorce through counseling, through therapy, and say you have to jump through all these, a year-long waiting period, a separation factor where you have to go to therapy before you file for divorce. If the courts put none of that in place, there is no logical instance in which a court can say they have the best interest of the children in mind, because they wouldn't have allowed it so easy on the front end. Everything else they say is hypocritical and it's a lie. So anytime you hear this vague best interest of the child, and it's usually on the perception of the bias of the judge who's got their own issues going on, then it's illogical to even argue. And you can't argue with them because they're in a position of control. They're in an arena they own, so they're not going to listen to you. They're going to just justify why they do what they do, and their buddies in the next courtroom or at the higher level within those courts is going to back their play. Why? Because they're protecting their interest. So how do you do this? How do you correct a broken system? You treat divorce as if it's the destruction of what it is. It's the destruction of a family. It's the death of a family. When somebody breaks the law for drunk driving, what do? Besides sentencing them and have real harsh penalties for breaking the law and drunk driving, what do? A lot of times they will do these scared straight programs where they will take a kid who's drunk driving or somebody who's drunk driving, force them to sit in a meeting with families of the victims who've died or been maimed or hurt by the actions of a drunk driver. Listen to the stories of death, destruction, and mayhem that a drunk driver has caused. And then, after that, they will oftentimes send them to the morgue to actually look at the dead bodies of victims of drunk driving to show, hey, this is what your actions cause. This is the damage your choices cause. In abortion clinics, now abortion is legal in the United States, but Roe versus Wade was struck down at the federal level, and then it's left up to the states. How I'm not going to get into the politicization of the abortion issue, but I'm just going to say here, no matter how you spin it, abortion is the ending of a life, whether it's fully formed or other, blah, 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 blah. That's a whole other story. It is the ending of a life. Now, there are some people who go out in front of abortion clinics and blow abortion clinics up and shoot people, doctors, and whatnot. I don't agree with that. I don't believe that that is a positive way of handling a very uh, delicate situation. But I do believe that there is a very effective way to deal with the situation. Drunk driving is what they call a high crisis activity. It's basically an activity that occurs during heightened emotions, whether it's an altered state of consciousness and the potential for high crisis. It's when you're drunk driving. You're an altered state of emotion. You're making decisions that you're not in the right mind, and it's dangerous. Okay. When you're going for an abortion, unless it's for a medical emergency to yourself or, in cases of rape, which account for less than 1% of all abortions nationwide, 1 to 3% I think is medical emergency to the mother or the child or rape and incest. The rest are all a form of birth control. When you're going to outside of that 3%, let's say 97%, when you're going to an abortion clinic, your emotions are high. You're struggling with all these things, all these emotions are hitting you. You're in a high crisis situation. You're thinking on emotion and fear guiding your actions. You don't know what to do. Outside of abortion clinics, you have people protesting, showing pictures of dead babies or aborted fetuses. You have other people out there that have booths set up for pre-abortion counseling, for pre-abortion services to help deter you and say, hey, maybe there's an alternative here to abortion. Now, the people who run the abortion industry don't want that. Why? Because it's a cash cow. There's a lot of money to be made in abortion services. And a lot of those abortion services, where do they happen most? Minority communities. Where do a lot of divorces take place? Where do a lot of incarcerations take place? Minority communities. Separate the men, put the men in prisons, don't rehabilitate them, separate the kids from the fathers. You got the gang issues coming up, crime issues. You got new gladiator academies. Lather, rinse, repeat. You've now created another revenue stream. Same thing with abortion. Why stop it? Because it rakes in a lot of money, and you do it into the minority communities. It's population control on your minorities. You keep them in check. So you're actually manipulating and human trafficking minorities too. You've monetized an industry on human trafficking, made it legal. So you have people out there trying to deter from that and say, wait, no, human life is valuable. Human life, families, people are worth something. Why aren't we doing this in front of divorce courts? Why don't we have booths out there with people manned day in, day out with reality checks, handing out pamphlets? Your free right to petition is out there. Your free right to go into to deter people from going and filing divorce cases, show them the reality of what their actions are. Flyers put out, videos put out for free. You'll say, "Well, I don't have the time, blah, 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 blah." As long as people don't have the time and no one's willing to fund it, the problem's not gonna go away. Problem's gonna exist. If somebody were to pay me and help me in my time, I'd be out there every day. I gotta put food on my table. That's what's keeping me, so I'm utilizing my platform to the best of my ability, at least getting the knowledge out there that hasn't been there yet. But that's what needs to happen. There's 52 counties in California, 52 Supreme Courts where all superior courts where all the divorces are handled, that are filed there. Why aren't there 52 chapters of people out in front of each of these courts trying to deter people from getting divorces and starving the fuel supply? Because you're not going to ever get it to change at the legislative level. Why? Because the legislatures, both Republican and Democrat, make bank off of divorces. Why would they promote any legislation that cuts off their funding? It's not logical. You just had so it's happening in divorce in California. Divorces are rampant out here. Family structures are dying, and now you just had a governor in a Republican held area who's doing it too. This is on both sides of the aisle. People, wake up! Your government doesn't care about your families. Doesn't care about you. Doesn't care about your kids. And when they put gag orders that you're not allowed to talk about it in front of your kids, I had I had heard a story, and I know this to be true. I've heard a lawyer and a judge said, "I hope the children never find out what happens in these courtrooms." Of course you don't. Because if they don't find out when they get older, they're going to have problems and they'll end up in the courtroom too. I mean, you can snow job them too. Of course you want ignorance. Of course you want ignorance because it's repeat business for future generations. So these gag orders are there to shut you up from teaching your kids about what happens in these environments so that they themselves will get a divorce later on and they're no wiser for the wear. Wake up, people. You're being played. I'm sure I can talk a lot more about this, but I don't want to ramble. I want to be poignant. People can comment on here all you want, and I'll answer the best way I can. I'm a child of divorce. I know firsthand what it's like and how damaging it is. Been through a divorce myself, and I know what all the players are going through. And I know the culpability of the courts too and the way they rule. Can't change that fact. When you know the players involved and you know their culpability, you know what they're about, then it's exposed. You can't put the cat, back in the bag or whatever they want to call it. It is what it is. So I think with these two videos, I've kind of covered a lot. We're at 48 minutes, an hour and a half talk on this subject. Again, there's a video in my link. It's called Divorce Corp. It talks about the industry of divorce, but when you look at the bigger picture, it's how all courts are run. All courts are basically revenue generators for the state. They want you fighting people. They want you fighting your neighbors. They want you fighting your ex-spouse. They want you monetizing everybody they can because they can make money on the transactions that take place. Starve the beast. Learn to talk with your neighbor. Learn to talk with your ex-spouse. Be that example for your kids. Be that shining light. Otherwise, you're just contributing to the negative in the world. And it goes back to my thing about your legacy. What's your legacy when you leave? What's your legacy when you leave this earth? What can you look back and say, "Man, I'm proud that I did this, this, this. Did I have honor and integrity and stand up for what is right, or did I just buckle and go with the system because everyone else told me to, and this is how you do it?" Think about all those things. Watch my other videos. Everything here bleeds into this, and the ones in the future will bleed into this too, because this is all about the human experience. It's all about connecting to people. It's what we're all in this for. We're all trying to connect to each other. Anyway, thank you for this time. Uh, I hope you guys are all well. Please click and subscribe and share this video with people going through a divorce or have been through a divorce. This is things that you're not going to hear in these marriage retreats by Focus on the Family or these other Christian organizations. I went to several of those when I was married. They don't touch on this. They touch on the spiritual side, and it's a lot of it, they're throwing softballs, but they're not dealing with hard issues. Anyway, hopefully this enlightened you in some areas, and let me know if I can help in any way. Have a good night. Bye.